Hello, thanks for joining us. It's been a really strange and disturbing week with the invasion of Ukraine. One of the things that has struck me as I've watched news feeds on that has been those people who have headed back to their country in order to fight for it. They've made me think about the subject of commitment. What moves a person? A strong sense of identity, I suppose, an identity with their country so powerful that they feel the urge to head back out of safety into danger at high risk, not just of death, but probably a very unpleasant death, at high risk to themselves because of some urge within them arising from their identity, who they feel they are, what they feel the moment calls for from them. And they've challenged me, made me think about my own commitment, even as I've prayed for them in theirs. We're going to take a visit back to an important moment of commitment for four guys, Andrew and Peter, who were fishermen in one boat, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were fishermen in another boat. They worked together. The situation was that Jesus needed to have some crowd control, really. He was preaching by the side of the Sea of Galilee, and people were just crowding round him to hear. And he needed a sound system, something that would deal with this. Well, not far away from where he was talking, but not in the front row of those listening, were these four guys. They were cleaning their nets after a failed night shift. So I guess and hope that they were at least listening with one ear, but they were busy about their work. And Jesus asked if he could borrow one of the boats, and he turned it into the church's first sound system. By pulling off just a little way from the shore, he could distance himself from the crowd and make a natural barrier, and then he could be heard by everyone. When he was finished, he had another plan. I'd like us to think about that, and I'm going to read it to you in a minute. But first, some words from Mark Twain. This is probably the first time I've ever quoted him in a message. But anyway, he said there are 2 days which are important in a person's life. The day you are born, and the day you find out why. I suppose that some of those headed back into Ukraine are people who feel they found a reason for their living, for being who they are, for being Ukrainian, and they're not experts, they're not soldiers, they're not trained, they're going back ill-equipped, unready to do what they feel that they should do. And I draw a kind of parallel with some care between them and Andrew and Peter, Simon as he is in this passage, James and John, and indeed you and me. So here's the passage. It comes from Luke chapter 5. You may know it. I love it, and I actually find myself going back to it again and again. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, with the people crowding round him and listening to the word of God, he saw at the water's edge 2 boats, left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to pull out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat, to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. And now we come to an important moment. I'm going to emphasize it in the words I'm just going to follow the reading with. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you'll catch people." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. There's a general reason why we were all born, to go back to Mark Twain's point, two important days. The day when you were born and the day you found out why. Well, a general reason for us all being born, all human beings, is to share life with God and to take part in God's love. That's what human beings are on the planet and in existence for. But I think of it like your fingerprint, right? You may have a fingerprint, but it's different to everybody else's, even though they've all got fingerprints too. So there's a general truth about human beings. We've all got fingerprints, all of us. But only you have your particular fingerprint. Well, we're all born to share God's love and to share in God's life. But only you have your particular life to share with God and your particular calling, your particular version of it all. And when you find it, then there's something else that can happen, is that you'll find other people who have a calling very closely related to yours, and you'll join them. And you'll find comradeship as people with a common sense of strong identity develop. And in the church, we tend to call it fellowship. It's an old-fashioned word, but it's to do with that bond of belonging and purpose that we share together. The days of going to church have long passed. There's no church to go to. The church is a community started by Jesus and started that day with Simon and Andrew and James and John. Jesus used Simon's boat to do his kind of fishing, which was to reach people with the good news of God. And then he invited Simon and Andrew, James and John to go with him. He called them. And I want us to notice two things. First of all, the calling, and secondly, the struggle that Simon then had. The calling was simple, and Jesus really issued it by the miraculous catch of fish. That's where Simon began to realize that he was in deeper, so to speak, than he had previously understood or grasped. And to understand that you have a calling is really important. You may think, well, yeah, calling is what Jesus gave to Simon and Andrew, James and John, to the Marys, to Salome, to Paul or Timothy or Barnabas, the important people, the foundational people in the New Testament. But you'd be wrong, and you can tell that you'd be wrong if you did think that by just reading a bit more of the New Testament. Because if you read the letters to the ordinary people of the ordinary churches, then you'll find that they're almost always addressed as those chosen or those called. Anybody who has started, however tepidly, however falteringly, to follow Jesus is following a calling. And you have that calling then. If you have started, however inadequate you may feel, if you've started with your following of Jesus. Well, Peter had an issue about that calling. Later he would hear Jesus talk about a simple truth. In John 15 at verse 16 we find it. Jesus says to them, You didn't choose me, I chose you. And that makes all the difference. You see, you can't choose for God to accept you because you can't choose for anybody to accept you. Acceptance is in the person who does the accepting. And therefore, it's what we in the church as Christians call the grace of God. God's decision to love and accept you, whatever you feel about it, and not waiting for you to become good enough or something special. So Simon, when he realizes that this miraculous catch of fish is not just a good day's fishing, but God's intervention in his life, that somehow the special day has come upon him, he falls to his knees in a sinking fishing boat in front of Jesus. And he says, you need to go away. I'm the wrong guy. I'm sinful. And Jesus' response is, well, don't be so afraid. Don't be scared of your sin. Don't be frightened of your inadequacies. Don't be frightened of your self-image and the identity you have. I borrowed your boat to do some fishing today, my kind of fishing. Come with me, and you can fish for people with me. And that was his calling, in his time, in his place. And you have your calling in this time and our place. And it's a calling you can share with Simon and share with others. It's not to be a fisherman, and it's not to be Simon. And it's unlikely to look a lot like his life. But it's about God, and it's about you, and about the decision the fisherman made to follow Jesus. And the message is, you're called because you're accepted. Obviously, nobody calls somebody who's unacceptable. And as Jesus would go on to teach them, we're not called because we're good enough. Jesus didn't come into the world because God is looking for good people, but because God is looking for the rest of us instead. All of us with the fingerprint that tells us, do you know what? I'm really not the kind of guy. I'm not the kind of woman. I'm not the kind of person for Jesus. Jesus says, well, don't be scared of that. Come with me anyway. It's a starting line, not a finishing line, when we decide to follow. It's the beginning of a journey, not its end. It's the beginning of development, a rebirth, not a conclusion and not a completeness. We'll feel like Peter, inadequate and perhaps a bit scared of what we don't understand and what we're not really up for. And the message to us is, no, just do it anyway. Just understand from now on, you've got an identity that lies deeper than all the others. An identity that drives you to a choice and which calls you to a loyalty and to a commitment. And that is where we find ourselves as the people of the Church of Jesus. God bless you and give you a good week as you spend this week following him, and as you join yourself to whatever church you do, to be with others, to share the calling and the comradeship of the cause of Christ, God's love let loose upon the earth.